think gold rush is probably the right way to describe what's happening right now. Everyone wants to capitalize on AI as quickly as possible, but telecom is not a sandbox. Organizations want a Ferrari engine, but they're fueling it with swamp water.
What separates organizations that truly scale AI from those that struggle?
Yeah, look, it usually comes down to whether they treat AI as a capability exercise, not just a technology deployment. The most successful organizations invest heavily in education, shared standards, and clear accountability. The operators that win with AI won't necessarily be the ones with the biggest models. They'll be the ones with the most trusted data, the clearest governance, and operational discipline to industrialize AI responsibly and at scale.
Welcome to the Connected AI series, where we explore a range of topics related to AI. In this episode, we focus on how telecom operators and CSPs can turn emerging technologies into measurable business value. I'm Bharat, VP of Business Transformation at Aarav Solutions. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest topics in telecom, AI. Everyone is talking about AI. Every operator is running pilots. But for Tier 2 and Tier 3 MNOs and MVNOs, the real question isn't, can we use AI? It's, can we trust the AI we use? Because in telecom, a wrong answer isn't just inconvenient. It can trigger billing disputes, service disruption, customer churn, and regularity scrutiny. To help unpack all of this, I'm honoured to be joined by our COO, Bhavin. A bit about Bhavin. He's an ex-CDAO. He's led numerous change initiatives across highly regulated industries, and all things AI. Bhavin's one of the chief architects. Bhavin, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks, Bart. Thanks for having me here.
So there's clearly a lot of momentum around AI, but telecom feels like a very different environment. Why are the stakes so much more higher for operators than they are for other industries?
Yeah, I think gold rush comes to mind. And I think it's the right way to describe what's going on at the moment. Everyone wants to capitalize on AI as quickly as possible, but telecoms, that space is not a sandbox environment. If an AI hallucinates a billing adjustment or makes a poor network decision, affecting thousands of subscribers, you're not just dealing with an unhappy customer. You're dealing with regulatory exposure, financial loss, and reputational damage. And that's why, quite frankly, trust is non-negotiable.
That's such a good point. And despite all the enthusiasm, many operators struggle to move beyond pilots. Studies suggest that 70 to 85% of AI initiatives never deliver meaningful ROI. Why do you think so many organizations get stuck in what we call pilot purgatory?
Yeah, look, I'd say in two words, data swamp. Organizations want a Ferrari engine, but they're fueling it with swamp water. Mm-hmm. The data is fragmented, inconsistent, and trapped in silos. And without a strong data foundation, typically, even the best models will underperform. And typically, we see 5 recurring issues: no clear prioritization strategy, fragmented data, weak governance, siloed implementations, and limited capability uplift across the organizations. Mm-hmm. And then you add to that security gaps and lack of responsible AI controls, and you've got a serious reputational and operational and regulatory risk.
So before we even talk about models, if I'm hearing correctly, you need to get the foundations right. Strategy, data, governance, and people?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, responsible AI, it starts with disciplined fundamentals.
So one misconception we hear a lot from Tier 2 and Tier 3 operators is we don't have the hyperscaler budgets. We can't compete. Do operators really need giant models, massive investment to create meaningful value?
Not at all. And in most telecom use cases, context matters, I would say, far more than the model size. You don't need a huge generic model to solve billing disputes or to predict churn. What you need is a focus model, or what we call a small language model, trained on your business rules, roaming agreements, and customer behaviors. That's where real value comes from.
There's also an issue of sovereignty. Operators are understandably cautious about sending proprietary network and customer data to public models. But how important is data sovereignty in your view?
It's critical, right? Your operational knowledge is a strategic asset, after all. You need to control where your data resides, how it is used, and who has access to it. And you also need explainability. If AI recommends declining a customer credit request, for example, the model said so, it's not an acceptable answer for auditors or regulators.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, trust requires both sovereignty and traceability. But when organizations get that right, what kind of business outcomes would you expect to see?
The results can be substantial, right? And given our research and along with the market, we are seeing around 30% gains in operational efficiency. EBITDA improvements of roughly 1.5%, reduced preventable churn, faster fault resolution, smarter upselling, and new digital services beyond connectivity. But again, and those outcomes only materialize when governance is embedded from the very beginning.
Which brings us to one of your famous stories about TED. I think it's the simplest way to explain what can happen when guardrails are missing. Would you mind sharing the TED story?
Yeah, sure, of course. So imagine TED, a product manager, testing a new AI-assisted customer retention workflow, which is connected to the operator's CRM and billing systems. Curious about the model's limits, starts probing the chatbot edge case scenarios. Because the system has weak guardrails, the AI hallucinates a new 50% retention discount and surfaces it during a live customer interaction. The customer screenshots this in the conversation and posts it publicly. Suddenly, customer care, finance, legal, PR are all dealing with a problem that really should never have happened in the first place. So that's just an example of where this sort of things can happen.
Poor Ted. That story makes the risk very tangible. So how can we stop TED from causing such an issue?
Yeah, I'd say, look, by building governance into the system from day one. For example, jailbreak filters can detect attempts to override instructions and block unauthorized responses. Instead of improvising, the chatbot redirects the user to approve policies and workflows.
That nicely ties into the responsible AI framework that's emerging across the industry. We often talk about the 6 core pillars. Would you mind going through them?
Yeah, sure. So the 6 core pillars are, it starts with transparency. People need to understand the AI output, is where it's coming from, and not feel like it's some black box making decisions nobody can explain, right? So explainability is really important. Sustainability. So AI shouldn't just create a one and done short-term excitement. It needs to deliver long-term operational value in a way in which the business can realistically maintain and evolve with it, right? And then 3, I would say reliability, safety, and security, especially in telecom and regulated industries. The AI has to behave consistently, safely, and securely, because one bad decision can have real operational and customer impact and repercussions. And then 4th, privacy. Organizations need confidence that sensitive customer, commercial, and operational data is being protected and handled responsibly at all times. And then you have fairness. So AI decisions should be consistent and unbiased, particularly when they influence customer outcomes, pricing, or operational prioritization. And then lastly, accountability, which I think is really important. At the end of the day, AI should support human decision making, not replace accountability. Someone in the organization still owns the outcome, right? And so, when you pull these 6 pillars together, they form a practical framework for how organizations can operationalize AI responsibly in regulated environments.
I guess for someone leading OSS and BSS, that really boils down to 3 key questions. Is my data protected? Can I trust the output? And who is accountable if something goes wrong?
That's spot on. That's why we apply a structured governance lifecycle. We assess each use case before development begins, evaluate the quality of training data, test models rigorously, continuously monitor performance in production. Metrics like faithfulness, answer, relevancy, and BERT score help us measure whether outputs remain grounded and reliable.
So instead of hoping the model behaves, you create objective evidence that it is behaving.
Yeah, precisely. And automation plays a big role here. We generate AI fact sheets, maintain audit trails, provide governance dashboards, so teams can see risks and compliance status in real time.
And that brings us to one of the most overlooked aspects of AI transformation, which is close to my heart, as you know, culture. You can have the right use cases, the right models, the right governance framework, but if your teams don't understand how to work with AI responsibly, adoption stalls. You've seen this firsthand. So what separates organizations that truly scale AI from those that struggle?
Yeah, look, it usually comes down to whether they treat AI as a capability exercise, not just a technology deployment. The most successful organizations invest heavily in education, shared standards, and clear accountability, as well as sharing them the AI capabilities and tool sets. I worked with one organization, as an example, that created an internal learning system or learning program where teams met regularly to learn about all things AI, the AI tools available to them. They reviewed use cases that they may be all working on, discussed governance, and they shared lessons learned. They called this a DNA university internally. So that was short for Data and AI University, where they would discuss the latest and greatest in the world of AI and how to leverage that in everyday operations. The format was simple, but the impact was significant. It created a culture of critical thinking and shared responsibility across the business. Mm-hmm. And that's essential because no matter how advanced the models become, people remain accountable for the outcome after all.
I really like that example because it enforces an important point. AI doesn't replace human judgment. It amplifies it. But we both know organizations that succeed are the ones that equip their teams to ask better questions, challenge outputs, and make informed decisions. It seems that many companies overlook the critical role that change management plays in building that kind of culture. Once that culture is in place, selecting the right use case, I guess, becomes much more easier, right? But one thing we see quite often is that organizations initially think that the AI use case should be the one with the biggest financial ROI. Once you start unpacking operational realities, those priorities can change quite a bit. How often do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes organizations make is going straight for the jugular. On paper, the original top 10 use cases might look commercially exciting, compelling, good business case behind it. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But once you assess the wider business environment, priorities often shift quite significantly, we find. Because AI adoption isn't just a technology journey, right? As we've said before, it's an operational and cultural journey as well. And the first use case is incredibly important. We look at things like operational pain points, data readiness, ease of adoption, and whether the business is actually culturally ready for that first use case. And so, for example, we ask things like, is the data foundations mature enough? Is the workflow too complex for a first step use case? Are teams actually feeling administrative burden and pain today? Are users open to AI helping them? And then are governance and regulatory considerations properly understood? And sometimes we even ask a very simple question, right? Does this use case actually need AI at all? In some cases, the real opportunity is in improving a broken process or getting existing systems and workflows operating properly first. So given all of that, those considerations, sometimes the best first AI use case isn't the one with the biggest short-term monetary ROI gains. So, for example, we've seen operational teams spending hours manually navigating customer agreements during billing and dispute scenarios, simply trying to understand what was commercially agreed with the customer in the contract. Making that information alone conversational and easily accessible through AI can immediately reduce operational friction and save huge amounts of manual effort before you can even start to move into the more advanced AI use cases. Sometimes the real value is actually in building trust. And what I mean by that is, trust in the data, trust in the AI, trust in the process, and confidence across the organization that this can genuinely help people in their day-to-day operations and work, right? Because once you achieve that, you effectively, the next use case becomes much easier. And the next one after that. That's how AI becomes embedded in the DNA of the business rather than remaining stuck in pilot phase. Yeah.
That's interesting because many firms would immediately prioritize the biggest ROI use case. But if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, you're saying the first use case is about laying the right foundation, then chasing the biggest financial outcome immediately.
Yeah, no, exactly. A good example is Insight Forge, right? Which is our AI-driven operational intelligence framework, which is designed for telecom, OSS, BSS environments, right? At its core, when you think about it, Insight Forge helps operators correlate operational, commercial, and billing data together to identify things like revenue leakage, process inefficiencies, and potential customer disputes before they escalate, right? But one of the key foundational data sources is contract data, right? And the reality is many operators don't have contracts centralized or easily accessible for operational teams to interpret quickly, as I was saying earlier. So rather than jumping straight into advanced revenue assurance scenarios, the first step may simply be enabling natural conversation with contractual data, right? That alone creates immediate operational value, helping teams navigate agreements faster, reducing manual interpretation efforts, and improving accessibility to commercial information, which wasn't easily readily available before, right? But strategically, it also creates the first foundation for the next phase, where the platform then correlates what contracts say against what customers are actually being billed, right? And proactively identifying discrepancies before they turn into disputes. So you start with the contract, you look at the billing, and then you're correlating, and then that starts to give you the information that you really are looking for, right? You bring it together. So you piece it, you build it up together one by one. So it's really about that sequencing the journey, right? Responsibly. And so what we'll typically do is we'll work through a focused 12-week life cycle, right? With, let's say, that given use case, so let's say contract analysis. So like weeks 1 to 3, we'll be understanding the business problems, the architectural and data landscapes in place, what's needed, identify early AI champions. You need to bring them along for the journey, and then pinpointing with them as well the right first use case. And then weeks 4 to 8, together we're building the model and appropriate guardrails, and we do that iteratively throughout that process. And in weeks 9 to 12, we're testing, we're refining, and productionizing the solution. And then while we're starting to establish the operating model to evolve further, and the operating model is not just the technology, it's the people operating model behind that as well. as to how we kind of get behind this, and you start to lay that foundation in place, right?
So the first use case is important, but the real prize is repeatable capability you build afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when AI becomes a true business capability rather than just another isolated experiment.
So if there's one takeaway from today, it's this: AI delivers value only when organizations trust it. And that trust is built through strong data foundations, governance, and accountable teams. Bhavin, any final thoughts?
Yeah, look, the operators that win with AI won't necessarily be the ones with the biggest models. They'll be the ones with the most trusted data, the clearest governance, and operational discipline to industrialize AI responsibly and at scale.
Well said. And we've only just scratched the surface. If you're an OSS, BSS leader, a CTO, or head of data, we'd love to continue this conversation at DTW. Bhavin and I will be there in Copenhagen, DTW Ignite at booth 419. Come by to discuss your AI roadmap, pick up our AI value assessment framework, or just have a conversation where we can help you with your AI journey.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about your challenges and explore how you can turn AI into measurable business values. And we can be there along the journey with you.
Thank you for joining us for episode 1 of Connected AI. If you found this conversation useful, subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. Until next time.